Hello there. Welcome back to Star Wars in a Galaxy, watching all the stars we can get our hands on. I'm Eli.
I'm Jacob.
And here we find ourselves again in a position I feel like we haven't found ourselves in a long time. The beginning of yet another season of Star Wars in a Galaxy, watching all the stars we can get our hands on. Season 20, that is. This is our 20th season of Star Wars in a Galaxy. One of our longest. Going to be one of our longest as well, for reasons that we will explain shortly. This is episode 157 of Star Wars in a Galaxy. Jacob, we've talked about this day coming for a long time. We've made our jokes. We've talked our shit. Today, we are going to start our 13 episode dive into a series that I remember when it was announced, I will admit I thought very little of. But little did I know, I think would be one of the most important pieces of Star Wars for me in terms of how I interact with this and how I interact with Star Wars as a fan.
All right, I'm very interested to hear more, because that's not what I've heard from you before. But yes.
Oh, I'm not saying that in a positive way necessarily.
Oh, well, I'm interested regardless. And this is a show that I am very positive about. It needs no introduction. Yeah. Today we're looking at season 1, episode 1 of Andor.
A Star Wars story.
That is right. In the words of Palpatine, long have I waited.
Yeah, it's very important because they added the Star Wars story title unnecessarily in between, like a few weeks ago. I think we had this conversation on the show.
I know. I feel like that was an L move. I feel like Andor is just one word. Like, I feel like they didn't need to change that. That. I like it just being Andor, but
yeah,
that's neither here nor there. Hopefully, season 2 will be just as great.
Yeah, no. Well, so season 2, we're gonna be talking about season 1. Obviously, for the rest of the short remainder of the year of 2024 we have left. Going into 25, we know Andor season 2 starts April 22nd of 2025. I'm pretty sure, I'm almost 100% sure we will finish Andor season 1 before season 2 starts coming out.
Okay.
But
I'll be very
we're probably not going to get to season 2 for a long time, because we're going to go straight into Rebels and do that. I want to do that completely all in a row. I want to do Rebels season 1, season 2, season 3, season 4, no stops.
As we should.
Yeah.
Doubtless.
Just like we did TCW. I want to do Rebels as we did with TCW, no stops. Yeah, but I want to talk a little bit before we get into Kassa about Andor, about my relationship with this series.
All right.
Because I want to do this now, so I'm not constantly doing this throughout the next, 10 or so episodes.
Fire away.
With one exception, which is there's a certain guest I want to have on who I wouldn't be surprised if he and I get into a little bit of that conversation, because. But with the exception of that and this episode, I'm going to try and put my own personal feelings about Andor and the discourse around it aside. So I'm saying this so I can cover my bases, so I can feel like I talked about it here and not constantly have to bring it up later and stuff like that. So Andor is my least favorite of the Star Wars live action series. Now, the most important word in that sentence is favorite. I still very much like this show. I'm never going to argue that the show is not well written, well directed, well acted, well anything. I very much like this show. What got a little annoying, and again, this was Star Wars social media back at the time. As of this recording, this is the first recording we've done where Star Wars in a Galaxy is officially off of Twitter. We're not on Twitter anymore. We are inactive. Yeah. I mean, the accounts are still there, but I don't post on them anymore. Not doing anything like that. We're all on Blue Sky now, and Instagram and other places as well. But so I've made that shift completely for from not only for In a Galaxy, but for my personal accounts as well. The amount of stuff on not only on Twitter at the time, but just generally in the media of how Andor was the elevated Star Wars that used Andor as a cudgel to diss other Star Wars series, and specifically like The Mandalorian, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and The Book of Boba Fett. All three of which series, I will go on record and say, yes, I do like all three of those series more than I personally like Andor. I understand that not many, I understand that there are some who don't share my opinion, and that's fine. It's just my opinion. My only point in saying all of this is, and of course the fact that I turned it into a little fun. I had a little fun of my own, where I created a little Twitter account, which some of you may have heard of, called Andor is Better Than, where people were being so illustrious about the series, so flowery about the series, that I decided to compare Andor to just other things. Just to my whole thing was I was still adjusting to college. I was like really tired from all that huge transition, and I was just like, comparing this to other Star Wars stuff only makes marginally more sense than comparing this to unrelated stuff. You're only comparing these two things because they have the word Star Wars on the tin. They're actually not that similar. The Book of Boba Fett and Andor, despite both taking place in the Star Wars universe, are not that similar as stories. They're just not. And so do I let the discourse weigh my opinion of this series for me down a little bit? I think so. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I think it has weighed my opinion of the series. I believe I've rewatched fully through every other Star Wars series, live action series on Disney Plus, except for Andor. I think this is just my second watch through of this series. I think I've watched this episode twice specifically, but I think that's it. And yeah, because of other series being the butt of the jokes of Andor so much online, yeah, have I made Andor the butt of some jokes here on In a Galaxy? Yeah, I've done that. I'm not gonna say I haven't done that, because I have. And I'm trying with myself, and of course, one of the things I want to do on In a Galaxy always, and this is one of my main goals, and I think, I don't want to speak for you, Jacob, but I think this is just one of our main goals on In a Galaxy. We always want to talk about this stuff with people who love it. So I'm only bringing on people this season. We're only bringing on people this season, and Jacob and I have had discussions, and you'll get to hear all the people we're bringing on. We're only bringing on people who loved this show. Most of them probably more than I did.
I know I did.
Yeah, no, and that's great. I never want to, like, my thing is, like, I love it because it's Star Wars. It's not personally what I look for in Star Wars, but like I the only reason why I want to do this long field at the start is because some of you might be a little confused, because I am the one who tends to be a bit more positive on this show, and the dynamic might be a little reversed this season. And again, I don't hate this show. I do not hate this show. It's just simply not my thing, really, that I look for in Star Wars. I respect what it's trying to do, and I respect what it does in terms of expanding the lore, like, not the lore, expanding the breadth of the Star Wars franchise tonally, but I'm not crazy about that tone personally myself.
Thank you. I'm glad that you
probably way too big of a caveat, but you know.
I'm glad you got that off your chest. I don't really have anything to say on the matter personally. I will say two things though. Number one, when you stop caring about quote unquote discourse of what random strangers on the internet are saying about something, and you think and feel and react to a project, whatever it may be, music, movies, Star Wars, whatever else. In my personal life, I found that when I kind of consciously made that choice to leave the noise behind, I found myself enjoying things in general a lot more and just having more fun with it, whether I liked or didn't like whichever Star Wars thing we're talking about. One other thing though, I think it's okay if you don't like it, Eli, because our show is built on us, talking and being honest about what we think and feel about these shows, these movies, these books, these games. And rarely do we agree. But I think that it's also built on, finding things we like and different angles to appreciate shows, regardless of how we feel about them overall. I know this,
Yeah.
this process
and there's
that we go through.
and there's a lot to appreciate on the show. And I will just say this too, actually.
I'm not saying you have to love it. I'm just saying I don't think you should have to make any apologies if you don't like it. This is sort of the process, and we go through this with whatever it is. And Lord knows I've really found a lot more. I've really found a lot more to enjoy.
It's not just because
because of this show.
It's not just because I didn't want to make a caveat just because I didn't like it, just because I don't like it as much or anything like that. I was specifically saying because I know I've made a lot of jokes at the expense of Andor on this show. I wanted to I wanted to clear that up before we get into it, because there is a lot of stuff I will say this too. As the show goes on, I like it more.
It's a slow burn. It's a slow burn. Like this first episode is not my absolute favorite either.
Yeah, but specifically for me, the second half of the season does a lot more for me than the first half does. But
with that being said,
let's go into Kassa, episode 1 of Andor. You want to give us a summary right here?
A lot of different threads that we're opening up in this one, plot wise. So I'll give it my best shot. So we open on the planet Preox Morlana, where
that's the name of the corporation. Morlana One's the planet.
Sorry. Oh God. Wow.
It's confusing. It's confusing.
Not off to an auspicious start. I knew that. I just got it wrong. Not off to an auspicious start. Okay. We open on Morlana One. It's a rainy night, and Cassian Andor is making his way into the leisure zone. This sort of sleazy kind of red light bar and brothel district. Where corporate rules kind of, people look the other way. He enters into a bar, brothel, this establishment, and he says he's looking for someone in particular. He's looking for a girl from Kenari. When the bartender presses him, he says, It's my sister. I'm looking for my sister. She says that the only girl from Kenari who was there left a few months ago, and he leaves, but not before having a bit of an unpleasant interaction, a bit of a standoff with two Preox Morlana, or Premor for short, two Premor security guards. He's walking back out to where he parked his ship along this causeway in the rain, and the two security guards catch up to him saying, hey, we can, they're just trying to extort him, humiliate him, whatever, say, we're going to have to fine you, show us your ID, all that. However, when they get close, he fights back and overpowers both of them. However, they then realize that one of the security guards, he accidentally killed them. In a panic, he rejects the other security guard's offer to go into the police, or whoever, go into the police together, and he shoots the other security guard before running away. Next, we come to Ferrix, where Cassian is hiding out in a shipyard, a scrapyard of sorts.
Well, it's his home planet.
Yeah, and Ferrix...
new home planet.
Yeah, Ferrix is his new old home planet. We'll get to it. And we start having flashbacks to Cassian's old life, his original life as Kassa on the planet Kenari with him and his sister. So we start to understand a little bit more what's going on here. He gets... God, wait. Well, I have to look back at my notes. Yeah. He seeks out his friend Brasso, asking him to help create a lie about where he was, which Brasso does do for him. And then we go back to the Premor headquarters on Morlana One, where we are introduced to Syril Karn, who is informing his superior about the double murder that occurred on Morlana One the previous night. He is very, very concerned about this. However, his superior really doesn't care that much. He's very, very bureaucratic about the whole thing, just saying, you know what, stuff like this happens from time to time. Make something up. Be done with it. I can't report to the Empire that the crime rate or the murder rate is rising right before my important meeting. Back on Ferrix, Cassian goes to his other friend Bix, who works in a mechanic's garage, I think smuggling or illegally dealing valuable ship parts, and he asks her to contact her buyer because he is desperate to get his money from this part that he has, get off world. You know, he's on the run and he's very desperate. Bix is not very into that, but eventually she does agree. However, Bix's boyfriend Tim Carlo is getting a bit suspicious and jealous of all this, you know, furtive talking that Bix and Cassian are doing, and he starts following her. Back on where were we? Back on Morlana One, again, Syril Karn has his team of officers, or the people beneath him, working around the clock, working overtime to find the ship on which he escaped. They pull Cassian's file, and they see that he's from Ferrix. However, his underlings tell Syril Karn, you know, Ferrix is not really within our jurisdiction. It's going to be very difficult. He does not take kindly to them. Says, keep working. We're going to go to Ferrix, and we're going to get to the bottom of this. And this episode ends with another flashback of Cassian, then Kassa, and his little sister on Canary. Thank you. I don't know why that does not stick in my head for whatever reason. So we end with another flashback. So this is really sort of one giant expositional episode. You know, there's a lot of different people involved, people we see, people like Marva, who don't even show up in this episode. So it's an interesting episode because it's very sort of spread out in a sense.
Actually, this is another caveat I should do, just because of how we're covering Andor on this show, because as many have noted, Andor follows an arc structure of television formatting that's very similar to the Clone Wars and pretty much nothing else in Star Wars history, where we have these arcs, and very much the first episode is a lot of setup that you're going to need to know. The second episode builds on that setup with some new characters and new ideas, and then the third episode in the arc is where the shit goes down, is where the action happens, is where we find out what this arc was leading to the entire time. The first 6 episodes of Andor follow this structure to a T. Then there's 7, which is called Announcement, which is kind of a transition episode from 6 to 8. Then 8, 9, 10 follow that same structure, and then 11 and 12, although it's only 2, kind of follow the same structure, only it's 1 episode of setup instead of the normal 2. The point of that being, you may be asking, well, why don't you just cover the arcs? And the answer is, because this isn't the Clone Wars, these episodes aren't 20 minutes long, and it's not like we could just sit down and watch 3 of them and have a normal length podcast episode.
That would be like climbing Mount Everest. That would be very difficult.
So even though some of the episodes are only like high 30 minutes, stuff like that, low 40 minutes, they will get up to an hour. Like, I believe The Eye, which is the 6th episode of Andor, is, let's see, The Eye is 50 minutes. So like they're all between
relatively all between 40 and 50 minutes, pretty much.
Pretty much,
like
yeah.
30.
So we thought that would be a reasonable amount to cover on a galaxy.
Size pieces.
Yeah, and what's interesting about these 3 episodes, and specifically, I will just say this about 158, 157, 158, and 159 of In a Galaxy. What's interesting about all 3 of these is that these don't even that these 3 episodes don't even reflect how they were released in real time.
What do you mean by that?
Kassa, That Would Be Me, and Reckoning all released on the same day.
Really? I forgot.
They did a triple release for the first 3 episodes, and that's not something they did for any of the other episodes of the show. So people were very confused when Aldani, the 4th episode, released the next week, and it was just like a third of the story.
Yeah.
And then they had to back up and realize, oh, wait.
Yeah, we're actually getting this bit by bit.
They wanted to do a triple release for the first week, so we got the entire arc in 1 week. Now we're going to have to wait several weeks to know what we're fully getting into.
I can only assume whoever made that decision basically just thought, we don't want people to watch the first episode and then panic when it's, a very slow burn compared to most Star Wars episodes of TV.
I think it was actually just a marketing decision because of what Star Wars tends to do, because ever since Obi-Wan Kenobi, they've done this with all of their new shows minus The Mandalorian. With Obi-Wan, they did this. With Andor, they did this. With Ahsoka, they did this. With Skeleton Crew, they did this. Everything. With Bad Batch, they did this. They love the double release. They love that double release. And it makes sense. It's a good promotional marketing tool. And I think somebody probably told the marketing people at Lucasfilm, you can't do a double release for this one because that's going to feel really freaking awkward to people. So I think somebody at Lucasfilm was probably convinced to do, we'll do a triple release for this first one. Because this is the only time, I'm pretty sure, in recent Star Wars history that they've done a triple release. Bad Batch, I think they did. No, Bad Batch Season 3, they did a triple release. Bad Batch Season 2, they did a double release. Obi-Wan was a double release. Ahsoka was a double release. Skeleton Crew was a double release. The Acolyte was a double release. So I think it's more just in terms of marketing strategy. But so it's weird because I don't have it. The thing I was going to say is I don't have a recollection of watching this episode without the other 2 because that simply didn't exist. Yeah. It's really weird for me to be like, I often forget, especially with these first 2 episodes, I completely forgot about the first episode ends here and the second episode ends here. The first 3 episodes to me kind of blur in a way even further episodes of Andor don't. Anyway, we've done a lot of preamble. Let's get into this. So yeah, I think I wrote this actually in my notes later on, but I want to bring this up for this episode actually. One of the things I think is so cool. So obviously, this Star Wars is a lot about, okay, how can we take Star Wars elements and do them in a different way? Tony Gilroy has a very different filmmaking style than a lot of not only than historically how George liked to do stuff, but then how Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni and Deborah Chow and even Leslie Headland and John Watts and all the people before and after who've made Star Wars, his style is very distinctive from that. And one of the most distinctive things that sets this up, honestly, for me in the beginning is the music with Nicholas Britell's score, which is it's a little less openly emotive, I feel like, than your Williams, your Goranson. Not to say it doesn't have emotions, it's just it very much serves a different purpose. It's an undercurrent of the story rather than there are many Star Wars stories where I feel like the music is almost part of the story itself.
Absolutely.
This is not a diss on Britell at all. In fact, the thing I wanted to point out about Britell's music is actually an incredible compliment of it, because I think this is really cool that the Andor theme, although it has the same basic melodic motif, is actually arranged 12 different ways.
Really?
There is a different intro for every episode of season 1.
I didn't even realize that. That's so cool, though. Wow.
Yeah, it's specifically based on what Britell felt like the themes and the vibes of the episode were. He arranged it differently 12 different times, and I assume that's not going to stop. Cool, because Britell is back for season 2, so I believe the Andor theme is about to be arranged 24 different ways.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
I think the music in this show, I think, yeah, shout out to Bertel, absolutely. It's a fantastic soundtrack, but I agree with you. I think it doesn't so much. How do I explain this? It's it has a very different feel, like you said, in the way that it interacts with the other, with the way that it interacts with the dialogue, the cinematography, what's actually happening on screen, what's being said. It feels like it has a very different way of interacting with those things than, a Kiner score or a John Williams score in something like, Rebels, the original the Skywalker saga trilogy movies. I think that, and I think part of that, you're absolutely right, and it's really fun, is the way that it sort of oftentimes blurs the lines, like in the brothel scene. It kind of blurs the lines between what's the score and then what music is happening
yeah, the
in the scene.
diegetic
Like
stuff.
when they're
Yeah,
in the diegetic music, they're in the bar and you got that kind of
yeah.
cyberpunk vibe of music going. But do you want to should we talk about that opening sequence, because I think it's pretty fun.
Well, there's a whole lot, obviously. So I remember, and we'll get to this. I don't know if you remember when the trailer for Andor came out,
I
but I
don't
do.
remember in particular what the deal
The
was with that.
the there was a lot of, even with the trailer, there were a lot of eyebrows being raised about Andor in a good way. And I remember specifically, it opened up with a shot that actually we'll see not this episode but next episode, with the time grappler
Yeah.
hitting the drum on Ferrex to announce the end of the day. I remember just that was being like, oh, this is going to be different. No offense to what The Mandalorian and what the Book of Boba Fett and what Obi-Wan Kenobi have done. This is going to be a different kind of Star Wars. And we're very much look, we're starting with this very Blade Runner-esque shot of Cassian walking through the rain, clearly doing something where at any second, like, the risk is tangible. The risk for Cassian is tangible. And yeah, there's, as we'll I'm sure talk about, Andor, on the scale of Star Wars, where Star Wars always tries to tread that line between fantasy and science fiction.
Yeah.
Where I would argue that Star Wars is very rarely at the science fiction, on the science fiction side of the scale, much more
Star Wars is
straddling
really
the line.
Star Wars is fantasy. Star Wars is totally
Much more
fantasy.
straddling the line between sci-fi and fantasy. Andor, however, I think is the furthest sci-fi that Star Wars has, and in my opinion, should ever get.
Do you mean that sort of in the literal plot and writing, or more in terms of the feel that it gives?
Both.
Interesting. Okay.
I mean, there was a criticism from some Star Wars fans, including myself. Although, again, I understand why they didn't do this, but we have Vetch in this episode. We have those aliens. Actually, when Cassian's walking up to the brothel, we see like weird aliens in pods and stuff like that.
Yeah, the door, the pods coming out of the wall, those glass bubbles.
Yeah.
I love that part. It's so
other than those two, can you think of a single alien in this?
It is they don't really do the crazy makeup and costuming.
This is not
the way that they do in
Star
the other
Wars,
shows,
which is fine.
Yeah,
I want to clarify that, which is fine. It's just something that, like, the clearly humanocentric cast, the gritty feel of it, we're having to deal with different kinds of problems for the characters to overcome.
Yeah.
I think it's there. It just sets a different tone here. I hate to open with such a nitpicky gripe of mine.
No, it's a very interesting observation that you make.
No. I wasn't talking about that. I wasn't talking about that. I was talking about what I was just about to say, actually. Okay. And I remember seeing this on the screen, and I remember just thinking to myself, all right, really? Cassian's walking to the brothel, whatever. The camera pans up. Morlana One, the subtitle on screen. Okay, they did that for Rogue One. Not craziest fan of that. Whatever. Screw it. they're trying something new for this show. I'll roll with it. And then the 4 digits that would freaking torture me for the next 2 years came up on screen. BBY5.
You don't like that they used BBY?
Why'd you switch it?
BBY5 instead of 5BBY, that particular
Why'd you
part?
switch it? Why? I remember actually.
Why do you care? I thought you would be mad that they used BBY because that's like an out of universe sort of thing of how would you know if that hasn't happened yet. That I can understand having a discussion about, but like
the reason, and I forgot to explain the backstory around this.
I love that they use BBY instead of like BSI, or like Battle for Starkiller. Like I love that they use I love that they use the OG years. I love that. I know that that's specific to the sequel reference books, but I do like that. I kind of like that they're like, hey, we know you guys need to know what year it is. I was like, okay, you know what? Respect.
The only reason I say this is because a friend of mine, a friend of the show, was at the premiere of Andor. Luckily, was lucky enough to go to the premiere of Andor, and I remember hearing from him. He told me this after it had already come out, but like that Tony Gilroy kind of looked around the room when, like, he saw Tony Gilroy kind of look around the room when the BBY5 thing was read and be like, you like what I did with that? I'm like, and so like now that I know that, I'm like, I get it. You want to try something. It's just also just a really weird vibe because Tony Gilroy has talked so much. This is the thing I'm still trying to, and it is just interesting for me. Tony Gilroy has talked so much about how he's not a Star Wars fan. Specifically, how he wanted to tell the story because of these characters and because of the stories the arcs he wanted to give them, and that he didn't really give a shit about, like, didn't give a shit. I shouldn't say didn't give a shit. He didn't have the reverence for the universe that other Star Wars creators like Jon Favreau or Leslie Headland or John Watts with Skeleton Crew had. I think he's grown on Star Wars, like, through working on Andor. Do I think he's grown on Star Wars? Yeah. He's watched all the Rebels in preparation. He watched all the Rebels in preparation for season 2 of Andor.
Fuck yeah.
But he's
my guy. Rebels is my guy. Oh my God. My guy.
He said that in interviews. He said that in interviews. He said, I watched all the Rebels. I think the season 2 of Andor is going to be much more involved in the overall Star Wars universe, actually, just because of the widening rebellion and what that has to involve. And by the way, it's not like Andor isn't involved in the wider Star Wars universe. Fucking Yularen appears in an episode later this season, who I'm 100% sure Tony Gilroy did not know who that was when this series started. But yeah, my gripe with BBY5 out of the way. We get into this brothel already. We're going into a brothel. This is, again, I think that, like, there's a lot of adult undertones to this series, although I do think it still, like, manages, like, a bit of family quote unquote safeness. Like, it's just like, it's just implicit enough about what's actually happening that, like, I think it, like, can fit with the rest of Star Wars tonally. But it still is a different vibe. It is a more adult, a more grounded, gritty look into the Star Wars universe. Absolutely. And yeah, there's a lot happening here. Cassian's trying to, first of all, my favorite part about all this is that Cassian is not even brotheling right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's, like, I think the implication is, he's too good for.
No, he's not there for that.
He's too good for that. He's not there for that.
He's not there for that. But I just find it funny how the brothel owners and people there are like acting like people at a brothel normally would. And
Yeah.
he's like, I don't care about that. They're like,
Yeah.
why'd you come here?
Yeah. Yeah. I
Um,
mean, it's interesting as well, I think, is this, as far to my knowledge, I'm sure that there was some crazy shit in some Legends novel, some old EU novel. But as far as I know, this is the first time we see, talk about, discuss, brothels, sex work, prostitution in Star Wars on screen. Am I correct?
I think so. I will
Yeah.
say that there is a new Star Wars series that may have some hints towards something about that.
Yeah.
It might rhyme
Point,
with Lelatin Gru, but
yeah. Point being, I think
yeah.
this is obviously very intentional by this is an intentional choice by Gilroy, by the writers, to set the tone right out of the gate and say, this is a really, this is going to be a gritty show with some difficult, we're gonna have some difficult
Yeah.
questions.
It's the first Star Wars on screen
ideas
that even goes close.
Yeah.
It's
And I
the
think
first Star Wars on screen that goes
yeah.
close.
And I think beyond that, I'm a big fan of this opening sequence. Just, I think the kind of the music, the art direction, the dialogue, it all goes so well together to sort of underscore, like you said, the desperation that Cassian is experiencing, kind of looking for his sister, going into brothels, saying, have you seen this girl here, and it feels so fraught with tension. And the whole,
Yeah.
I mean, the whole sleazy sort of outlandish town with the people in tanks and like this whole like cyberpunk vibe that's going on. It's freaking awesome. It's very, very artfully done.
It's definitely it sets as I said before, it sets a very specific tone. And of course, the brothel opens up the first conversation of many that we will be having. And don't worry, we will be having with people who don't look like the two of us do about this series and the various, to me, incredibly obvious pieces of commentary this show has on systemic racism and colonialism and oppression and many topics in that Star Wars has always been political. It's been political since 1977, absolutely. This brought the politics to an explicit place or for the first time in Star Wars history that like you could technically probably ignore the political themes and stuff in previous Star Wars stuff, even though it was absolutely there. You cannot ignore the absolute direct political implications of Andor.
Yeah, I mean this show is this show is absolute. The question that this show answers is really what happens to humanity, and other you know what I mean. For our purposes, what happens to humanity under totalitarianism, authoritarianism, fascism, whatever it may be? What happens to humanity against that, and how do people resist against that?
And
that's really what this show
and specifically, of course,
it's clear from the outset too. Like it gets, we build on it in the sequential episodes, but I think right from the start, as soon as it's clear, and I think one example of that, if I can segue, is during the confrontation when the guards, they catch up to Cassian, outside the brothel. I think that's an amazing moment when we see all the expressions go through his face, the humiliation, the anger, the fear for his life, as they talk and threaten him and extort him and insult him. And I think that kind of exemplifies and sets the tone for in this show, like what this show really is, which is a human look at what it's like living under the Empire, and how somehow the totalitarianism and the supposed like extreme governmental rule and extreme rule of law of the Empire actually translates to complete lawlessness for the average people, where if you have a certain badge or a certain title, you are deputized to do pretty much whatever you want to the people beneath you. And I think that's really where the show's strength lies.
It is the strength of the show.
It takes a we've obviously, like you said, Star Wars has always dealt with authoritarianism, imperialism, war, like political ideas very relevant to our world, to the real world. But this really takes a microscope to how this impacts people on an individual level with a clarity and a conscience and an empathy that to me is unmatched. That's why I, not to jump the gun and go to the full conclusion, I guess I have, but that's really what's amazing about this show. And that's kind of, you see that in every single, more clearly sometimes than others, but in almost every scene, that's what undergirds the entire show and kind of holds it together, in moments like that with Cassian, with the guards, especially in this episode.
Yeah,
so I was a big fan of the opening.
Yeah, no. So we have moments like the one of the guards asks if Cassian swum over, which is a very direct reference to a slur that I'm not going to say, talking about immigrants to the United States, specifically from Mexico and from South America.
Interesting. I didn't realize that.
But and the first line that one of the security guards says to Cassian is, "Oh, that is a hard look for a little thing like you." It is that patronizing condescension. Cassian wasn't doing anything. Cassian was literally just standing there, and the brothel attendant happened to get to him before they got to the other security guards. That happens all. That's a nothing encounter. But because these men have been empowered, because they feel, because the Empire has allowed them to feel that they can do anything they want, especially for the reason that others around them are lesser than.
Yeah.
This is an empire that this is an empire. This is a system that openly breeds that sort of racism, and we'll see misogyny in the show. We'll see all different types of we'll see colonialism. We'll see all different types of xenophobia in this show, and look, to say it out front, they were racially profiling this guy. There's no other way to say it. The security guards were racially profiling Cassian. He was just minding his own business, and they decided to pick on him for no other reason than the color of his skin and the perceived background of his perceived background in identity, which happened to be right, but they didn't know. The Canary male with dark features later in the episode, though, that's all very intentional. This whole show, you could say, the very destruction of the first Death Star, because we obviously know that's where this is going up to, is all predicated on a racial profiling case. Now, that's obviously a gross oversimplification of what happens even in this season, but and this is, and I will agree with you as well. Like, the look of the Diego Luna, of course, throughout the series, he's the main character, and he just does so much to expand Cassian and the journey he goes on. But specifically, the look specifically the look, the expressions on his face when he's holding the second guard at gunpoint after he's killed the first one.
Yeah.
Of like, oh shit, I did the thing that I'm not supposed to do, but they forced it out of me, and I'm in this situation that everybody told me not to get into, and I didn't mean to get into it, but I did, and this is gonna be really bad. That's the overwhelming expression on Diego Luna's face of, this is not gonna end well for me.
Yeah, I mean, he did. Yeah, he did the number one in a political economic system like we have on Preox Morlana, or on Morlana One under Preox Morlana. There's pretty much there are no rules for the ruling section of society. In this case, the corporation and whoever are their enforcers. For everyone else, there's plenty of rules, but the number one rule, the cardinal sin, is that no matter what the ruling class, no matter what the enforcers, the corporation does to you, if you raise a finger, much less kill, if you raise a finger against one of the enforcers in this instance, much less kill them, you're done. Cassian knows that. That's how the Empire works. That's how the Empire enables, the giant companies and these free trade zones and, whatnot to work. Clearly, I think it's really clearly sort of a metaphor. Maybe metaphor is not the right word. It feels very much like a parable for kind of the neoliberal world order, where you have, lots of countries, in the global south, particularly in Africa, who are pretty much, their governments are kind of powerless to stop, multinational mining companies and, rubber companies and other things like that. So I think you're absolutely right to say that this is a very, very political show. I mean, we can sit around all day and kind of, draw up those kind of connections.
And if you look at the conversation, just jumping ahead a little bit, that Syril has with his commanding officer, the head inspector. I don't remember what his name is. I don't remember what the role is. I know he's Deputy Inspector Syril Karn. But there's that line where the head inspector says as much. They were killed in the fight. They were in a brothel, which we're not supposed to have. The expensive one, which they shouldn't be able to afford. Drinking Revnog, which we're not supposed to allow. Both of them supposedly on the job, which is a dismissible offense. I'm reading directly from the script here.
Yeah.
And so what is the Empire going to do to this egregious violation of all of their rules and regulations by two of their officers? Nothing, really.
Well, I think his point is that they have to, as well, he's kind of trying to hide it from the Empire, because what we see here is how, institutional rot and corruption and malfeasance sort of is a vicious cycle, where because they were doing all the wrong, because the guys were doing all the wrong things, and that's what led to them getting killed by Cassian. The boss, the chief inspector has to look the other way. I think that's something we see in this show over and over again with the Empire, is sort of the institutionalization of the institutional culture of complacency and silence, and just not everyone, you have to look out for number one in this system. Is pretty much what
absolutely. But I don't think
saying.
But I don't really think that, I don't think it was this officer that, I don't think it was this officer who was.
No, I'm not saying it was. It's because there's no accountability. It's because there's absolutely no accountability that we have this.
And because the overall the overall, not necessarily rules, but norms of the Empire is we see this all over the Empire of Imperial officers just generally, and stormtroopers even, just generally treating themselves as above the normal people of the galaxy. Whether that's, I'm thinking of that theme from the beginning of Jedi Survivor, where on Coruscant, where there's a civilian who's like, you can't do this to us, and the stormtrooper's like, yes, we can. Or, the way that Oresco and Grint treat the civilians of Lothal at the beginning of season 1 of Star Wars Rebels, the martial law that Morgan Elsbeth inflicts on the citizens of Kaladin in Tales of the Empire and The Mandalorian. Like, this is a common thread. This is an institutionalized set of behaviors that is the institutionalized set of behaviors that is a part of the system and not a bug in the system.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's a feature, not a bug.
I think that's what the show is really. That's what they're trying to tell us in this part of the episode, particularly, where you have you have aspiring change makers like Syril Karn who come in, full of energy, full of, I want to do this the right way, and then we see how the massive inertia of the bureaucracy, and of the culture that has been enforced and institutionalized sort of just, and he's pretty persistent, but like the idea is, he's Syril Karn. Well, the biggest part of this episode for me, one of the biggest parts of this episode is just his obsession and his will to kind of bring Cassian to justice is running up against the inherent massive inertia and complacency of all these, massive imperial corporations, which all kind of, they just say, as long as the credits are flowing and people keep coming into work, that's all we have to do to maintain our position.
And Syril is one of the most interesting characters for me in the series, because here's a guy who clearly all of the imperial propaganda worked on. This is a man who has been brainwashed, and I don't say that lightly. He has been brainwashed. This is a guy that is obsessed with the ideology of imperial fascism. Yeah. There are those, I'm not sure if how early they give you the electrocyanide capsules that are seen in The Mandalorian and Ahsoka, and I believe the Book of Boba Fett too. Maybe not, I don't remember. And the Bad Batch, obviously. I don't know how early they give you those when you're in the Empire, but my guy was totally itching to get one of those. It would have been his utmost honor to die in the name of serving what he believes to be one of the greatest governmental systems in the history of the galaxy. This is the guy. This is the guy, and what I love is an interesting word to say about this. But like, I appreciate Kyle Solar and his just like the glances that he gives. I mean, this guy's a creep. This guy is incredibly creepy, and he is like, even a lot of the Imperials who are disgusting themselves, I feel, find this guy disturbing, which I like. There, we'll see. We'll obviously see. We see this even here with the head inspector Imperial. We'll see this later on with Dedra Miro, where Dedra is as loyal to the Empire and has that fidelity that the Empire is looking for its highest ranks of officials. But she comes to Syril and she's like, this guy is just a bit too much for me. Like, calm down, my guy. And that is to me that's to me what the interesting, and of course how that's similar to Cassian. Not that Cassian could ever have fallen for the ideology of the Empire, because obviously it's hard to do that when you're so easily oppressed and when you're so visibly oppressed by that system. but like, I think it's one of those things where, like, yeah, even though ironically the two like meet for like a second in episode 3 and then never again for the rest of the season, it makes sense to have Cassian, somebody who is going to come to the ideology of rebellion against the Empire throughout the season, to have his opposite, to have his foil be somebody who is so incredibly indoctrinated into the ideology of the Empire. It just makes sense.
Yeah, it's a real it's a real contrast.
Yeah. And also just the fact that, like, just generally speaking, like, that Syril Karn is pathetic. I mean, like, seriously, he does not get anything done this season, even though he is way more right about all the connections he's forming than most in the Empire. He gets nothing done this season.
I mean, he is rudderless and he's directionless, and he's kind of been indoctrinated to believe this, and also, you know, his life experiences have kind of shown him that the indoctrination and his life experiences and everything that's happened has taken him to the place of thinking the only way for me to, you know, have a meaningful life and to, you know, advance myself in the world and to be, you know, successful and happy is through serving the Empire. And I will be, you know, I will be rewarded with glory and status and the inherent virtue of, you know, upholding the greatness of the Empire. Like, it's sad to see, you know, he kind of starts off as this, I mean, he is kind of this, you know, kind of a little of a funny character in many ways, but you're right to call him pathetic. Like, I hadn't really considered that before, but he is a sad character. That is sad what he kind of experiences and what he gets rolled up into, just because he kind of gets sucked up into the propaganda machine.
And we'll see later in the show. I thought for a second once he was gonna go, like, I saw him going into some sort of facility in episode 1. I'm like, I didn't remember we met his mother this in the series, and we didn't. His mother appears later, but you know, once this all goes awry, once he's like dismissed as being even a little too crazy for the Empire, his mother has to, like, basically beg her sibling, his uncle, to get him a boring data collection job.
Yeah.
They have to grovel for family favors.
Yeah.
To get this guy a second chance. This guy is fucking pathetic.
And I don't know if that's necessarily his fault as well, but that's, you know, he's clearly been educated and brought up, you know, and indoctrinated in the Imperial system where, you know, it's not to the Empire's advantage in their propaganda and their education to create young individuals, you know, who are very versatile and resourceful and, you know, can, you know, get kind of put out in the cold, so to speak, and, you know, work their way back up. You know, it's to their advantage to have people who need to be cogs in the machine in order to survive. And also, you know, the Empire is a brutal government. Like, nobody in the Empire really cares. They're like, yeah, if you you know, run afoul of us in any way, if you get in trouble, if you get on the Empire's bad side, why should you ever get to have a job again? You know, like, think about that from the Empire's perspective. You know, they're like, like, you know, Tarkin would totally be like, yeah, put him out on the streets. Like, let this be, you know, let that be the threat hanging over anyone's heads. If you fuck with us, this is what's going to happen. But I want to bring us. Do you have anything more to say about this? Because I want to bring us back to some of the things that happened in this episode and you know, get your take on them. Maybe.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. Where do you want to go next?
I think we kind of covered. Yeah, I think we've covered Syril Karn and Cassian in the opening. I don't know. The Bix part for me is not. That's just sort of exposition and building suspense. Do you have any
I'll just
feelings
say
about
I like
her
Bix.
in this episode?
I like Bix. I really like Adria Arjona in this series.
Yeah.
I think that having both of them struggle with who they're going to be, who they're both trying to be as fascism bears down on both of them.
Yeah.
Is really cool, and I think that the unfortunately a lot of the Bix stuff that's most interesting to me comes later. And what we're stuck with more than Bix in these episodes. Yeah, do you want to go to the flashbacks?
Yes, the flashbacks. That's really where we start to get in the weeds in terms of what's happening, what's going on. And I didn't realize how little we actually get to in this episode of the
we don't get a lot.
The story, but basically, and this is what I mean about this episode when I say that it's a slow burn. Obviously, you really have to. This episode demands some patience because the first time, and even this time I was watching, I was just kind of like, man, the show, this episode's taking us all over Robin Hood's barn, introducing us to all these different people, and we're not even close to, figuring out necessarily the how or the why, really, for the story. But that being said, this was a very, very exciting episode nonetheless, mainly because of how tightly it was put together, like this show often is, and I don't really have any thoughts specifically at this point on the flashbacks. I think it kind of, once it really develops and we go into the crash site and everything like that, I think that's when it really becomes interesting. But I think overall this episode, I don't know. I it's definitely not my favorite episode of the show. But I think regardless of, how you feel about the pacing, I think just the artfulness with which everything is portrayed, the artfulness combined with the visceral intensity of certain moments, like the fight, or like some of the flashbacks, that's what really makes this episode for me, to put a bow on it. What else do you have for this, Eli?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that this episode it sets a very good foundation. Again, we are getting introduced to the cynical mindset that Cassian Andor has. We are getting introduced to where that comes from. We're getting introduced to the enormity of the system he's battling against. And of course, we get a few hints with Bix's buyer of sorts that there might be other things out there. There might be others out there who feel the same way that Cassian does about the Empire and about oppression. What was I going to say? I think, unless there's anything else, I think that's probably going to be it for this episode of Star Wars in a Galaxy. Next week, that would be me, episode 2 of Star Wars Andor. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. You can find us everywhere. You can find us on all podcast platforms. Wherever this podcast will be there. For not, email us at swinagalaxy@gmail.com. You can follow us on all social medias. We're now inactive on Twitter, as I mentioned earlier in this episode. And we're now inactive on Twitter. But go follow us on Blue Sky and Instagram and all those places. This is the first episode where I can announce this, so I'm very excited to talk about this. Because I'm thrilled about this. December 22nd, mark the date on your calendar. December 22nd, Jacob and I will be doing a live stream on the Star Wars in a Galaxy YouTube channel. where we will be celebrating 5 years of Star Wars in the Galaxy. That's technically in January due to scheduling stuff. Jacob and I are going to do it a little bit early, December 22nd. We're going to be answering some questions, some Star Wars opinions questions that we're currently writing right now. We're going to have guests on. They're going to answer the questions. It's going to be just a really fun time. Come hang out with us December 22nd. I believe I said it was going to be at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So come on over.
Bring it
have
on
some
down.
fun with us. Yeah, I think you can follow me at everywhere at OGFan327. Go to my link tree for all my stuff, linktr.ee/_OGFan327. And I think if there's nothing else, may the force be with you.
Always.